At dawn's mist-shrouded gates of Oakwood Cemetery, Albert "Al" Harding, a 78-year-old Marine veteran, appeared in his crisp dress uniform. Time had frayed the edges of the fabric, but not the dignity it carried. The buttons glinted under the gray light, polished with the same care Al had once given his boots before deployment. His gait was slow, measured, not with hesitation, but with reverence. Each step carried decades of memories. In his left hand, he gripped a single white rose. In his right, a weathered walking stick carved with the Marine Corps insignia. He moved along the gravel path until he reached the farthest corner of the cemetery, where a simple, flat gravestone lay flush with the earth. The marker read, "Unknown Soldier, Vietnam War, 1969. Al knelt, bones creaking but spirit unbending. He placed the rose gently at the head of the grave, fingers lingering on the cold granite. His lips moved in silent conversation with the dead. His face bore no tears, those had long been spent. But humiliation flickered through his expression, not his own, but one carried for a nation that never asked the right questions, that failed to see what he never forgot. The grave was not unknown to him. It never had been. He brushed snow from the stone, fingers tracing the year etched into it. He remembered that year too well. It had been the year everything changed. A year of lost laughter, of anguished cries, of promises that slipped through the cracks of gunfire and dust. A young boy had died in his arms then, a boy whose name was absent from history, but etched into the marrow of Al's bones. Bao Nguyen. His friend. His brother in all but blood. His unfinished story. Al bowed his head low, breath fogging in the cold morning air. "I didn't forget you," he whispered. "Not ever." In 1968, Lance Corporal Albert Harding was 21 years old, brown-haired and broad-shouldered, with a reckless grin that defied the heat of war. Vietnam was not the place they showed in recruitment posters. There was no glory in the sweat-soaked jungles or in the shadows of rusting corrugated bases. Still, Al arrived with a quiet resolve to serve, a belief that what he was doing mattered. That conviction didn't die easily, but it bled, slowly, day by day. The first time Al met Bao Nguyen, it was at Firebase Ripcord. Bao was 17, small-framed, wiry. His English was surprisingly good, self-taught, he claimed, from American radio and pamphlets. Orphaned in the Tet Offensive, Bao had volunteered to interpret for U.S. forces, hoping it would lead to a visa and a new life in America. He wore threadbare sandals and a borrowed army cap 2 sizes too big, but when he smiled, it lit the space like a lantern. They called him Kid, even the officers. Al called him by name. Bao clung to hope with the stubbornness of someone who had already lost everything else. He asked questions constantly. What's it like to drive on a highway? Do American schools have libraries in every town? Do hamburgers really taste like they say in the movies? He sketched dreams in the margins of Al's ration notepad, plans of becoming a doctor. He wanted to save people, to repay kindness. "I learn fast," he would say proudly. "You'll see. I'll wear white coat in New York one day." They worked together through patrols, field interviews, and tense negotiations in hamlets thick with suspicion. Bao translated, but more than that, he soothed. He explained, clarified, softened both sides where misunderstanding might have become deadly. The soldiers trusted him. Some even joked he was more Marine than interpreter. One night, under a sheet of monsoon rain, their unit came under surprise fire. Chaos cracked the sky open, muzzle flashes, shouted orders, mud exploding underfoot. Al remembered slipping in the muck, dragging Bao down beside him as they took cover behind a broken tree stump. There was yelling, some in English, most in panic. Then a scream. Al rolled to see Bao clutching his chest, eyes wide, blood blooming over his olive-drab shirt. It wasn't instant. Bao gasped for breath, one hand grasping Al's arm with astonishing strength. "I'm not ready," he choked, voice barely audible. "I know. I know. Stay with me, Al begged. He tried to stanch the bleeding, but it was too much. The jungle didn't care about white coats or dreams or 17-year-olds. As the firefight died down and reinforcements arrived, Al held Bao until his fingers went cold. No one asked about the interpreter afterward. Command didn't mention him in the debrief. There were no official forms, no dog tags, no records. When Al asked, a captain said brusquely, he wasn't enlisted. It's not our paperwork. They buried Bao quickly in a shallow field grave. The coordinates were written in the back of Al's notebook, next to one of Bao's last sketches, 2 stick figures under a hospital sign. Back at base, the letters Al wrote home shifted. At first, they were full of stories about camaraderie, Emery pranks, and the terrible Chow. After Bao's death, they changed. His mother would later say they became heavy, distant, but never bitter. Just quiet. Like he was carrying something. Years later, Al would reread those letters, trying to chart the exact moment innocence departed. He would stop at the one where he'd written, "He died trying to be one of us. But we never let him in. I didn't know how to fix it then. I still don't." After his tour ended, Al came home. He was greeted with polite indifference, like so many others. The war was unpopular. He got a job in shipping, wore long sleeves to hide the tattoo on his forearm, and rarely spoke about what happened overseas. When people asked if he'd seen action, he'd nod once, then change the subject. What could he say? That the person he mourned most didn't even have a grave with his name on it? Still, Bao never left him. In quiet hours, Al saw flashes, of the boy's eager eyes, of the way he laughed when he first tasted orange soda, of the night he confided that his favorite word in English was belong. Al carried those memories not like medals, but like scars. Not shameful, but solemn. Private. Years passed. He married once, briefly. No children. His ex-wife had asked once about the old notebook he kept locked in a desk drawer. He'd just shaken his head. It's for someone I owe more than I can explain. Al searched, at first. He contacted military archives, asked Vietnamese consulates, even wrote letters to newspapers on the off chance Bao's relatives might still be alive. No one replied. And so, he began visiting cemeteries. All he knew was the year. 1969, the anonymity of the dead haunted him. One spring, he found the gravestone. Unknown soldier, Vietnam War, 1969. It wasn't Bao's, not officially. But it was unclaimed. Forgotten. Just like him. Al made a decision. If no one else would remember Bao, he would. He began returning every Sunday, white rose in hand. A quiet vigil, a protest in stillness. He whispered stories to the earth, retold dreams once confided under jungle stars. And somewhere, deep in memory, Bao always smiled and listened. In the decades that followed, Al Harding's life unfolded like a shadow behind glass, visible, yet always a little apart. He lived modestly in a small apartment over a hardware store in Kingsville, Virginia, working part-time fixing antique radios and sorting mail at the local VA center. Most knew him as the quiet veteran who still saluted the flag even when no one was watching, who wore his Marine Corps pin on Sundays like it was still his duty to serve. But beneath the calm surface, a wound remained open. It wasn't the war itself, many veterans lived with ghosts. Al's pain came from the erasure. Bao Nguyen had vanished not just from the battlefield, but from history. The war had chewed him up, and the bureaucracy simply swept up the crumbs. No military registry carried Bao's name. The Department of Defense had no record of his service. He hadn't been a U.S. citizen. He hadn't officially enlisted. He hadn't qualified for burial in any national cemetery. According to the federal system, he had never existed in the ranks of remembered sacrifice. Al had submitted inquiries, formal requests, letters to senators. Every reply came back the same: insufficient documentation, unable to verify service, no record found. That phrase, "no record found," burned. He once traveled to Washington, D.C., standing stiffly at the gates of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. His fingers traced the polished black granite, scanning every name, hoping beyond logic that someone, somewhere, might have found Bao's real name and placed it here. But he didn't find it. He left a white rose at the base of the wall, just as he always did on that unmarked grave in Oakwood. Back home, Sunday visits became ritual. Rain or shine, snow or blistering sun, Al walked the winding cemetery path with a single white rose tucked inside a folded newspaper. He'd nod to the squirrels, to the robins that followed him, to the wind whistling through rows of headstones. At the grave of the unknown soldier, Vietnam War, 1969, he would kneel, clean the stone, place the rose, and whisper, "You mattered." At first, nobody noticed. Kingsville was a town of good people, but like most, it was busy. Busy with bills, and school board meetings, and bake sales. Busy trying not to think too hard about old wars or men with haunted eyes. Al never asked for attention. He didn't post signs or hold vigils. But in the quiet of repetition, he protested. Each visit was a refusal to let silence win. Still, he felt the weight of how little had changed. One winter, a younger veteran named Henry Banks joined him for coffee at the diner. Henry had seen Al's visits from afar and finally worked up the courage to ask. "Who's buried there?" he said over chipped mugs of black coffee. Al stirred his cup once. "A friend," he said. Henry waited, but Al didn't say more. The coffee cooled. Outside, snow began to fall. Eventually, Al added, "He gave everything." They gave him nothing. Henry didn't press further. But the words stuck. Later that year, Al filed one final request, a formal petition to the Department of Veterans Affairs, asking that the headstone be amended to read, "Bao Nguyen, interpreter and ally, died in service, 1969. He attached a sworn statement, letters from surviving members of his platoon, a scan of the notebook page where Bao had written his name in block letters beneath the words, "One day, Dr. Nguyen." He even included a photograph, a grainy snapshot where Bao and Al crouched behind a sandbag wall, arms slung over shoulders, grinning like brothers. The response arrived 6 months later, typed on government letterhead. "We acknowledge the sincerity of your request. However, due to the absence of verifiable citizenship, enlistment, or next of kin, we are unable to alter any federally maintained grave markers. We regret any personal distress this may cause." It was signed with a stamp. No name. No human. Al read it 3 times, then folded it once, precisely, and slipped it into the back of his desk drawer with the others. He didn't rage. He didn't write back. He simply kept walking to the cemetery each Sunday. Eventually, people started noticing. A jogger named Will caught sight of him week after week and began nodding respectfully. The cemetery caretaker, an older man named Jonah, once left a broom and fresh cloth beside the grave when Al arrived. But these were fleeting gestures, acknowledgments without understanding. Years trickled by. And with each passing one, Al's body slowed more. His knees stiffened, his back bowed. But the white rose never failed. It was always the same kind, long-stemmed, no ribbon, no message, placed directly in the center above the name Unknown. As if he were daring time itself to forget. Then came the year when the town announced plans to expand the cemetery parking lot. A notice went up in the town paper. Al read the words with a sinking heart. Reorganization of unused cemetery sections for infrastructure purposes. Section 17, where the unknown grave lay, was marked for adjustment. No graves would be moved, the notice assured, only rezoned. But Al knew what that meant. Forgotten plots got new roads, new shrubbery. And eventually, they got buried, again, under convenience and cost. He went to the town hall meeting. Sat through budget presentations, architectural models, polite indifference. When he stood to speak, his voice shook. "There's a boy buried in that section," he said. "He saved lives. He had dreams. And he doesn't have a name." Silence followed. A few people looked up, uncertain. The mayor, a kind woman named Doreen Myers, gave him a sympathetic smile. "Sir," she began carefully, "do you mean an unmarked grave? Or—" "I mean a grave they chose not to name," he replied. She paused. "We'll review all historical records before making any changes, I assure you." But Al knew records weren't the problem. The problem was that Bao's story had never been written down in the first place. It lived only in his memory. That night, he returned to the grave and knelt longer than usual. He placed 2 roses this time, one for Bao, and one for the truth that refused to bloom. The first snow of winter arrived earlier than expected that year, blanketing Oakwood Cemetery in a hush that made the world feel paused. Trees stood like frozen sentinels, branches heavy with white. Footprints disappeared behind Al Harding as he slowly made his way toward Section 17, cane in one hand, his usual single white rose in the other. His breath steamed in the air, rhythmically in and out, each puff measured by exertion and stubbornness. He was 77 now, and every step was a conversation with pain. It had taken him twice as long to reach the grave that morning. The sidewalks hadn't been cleared, and the thin layer of ice had turned the winding gravel path into something treacherous. Twice, he'd stumbled. Once, he nearly fell. From behind a thick line of pines, someone had been watching. Miguel Rivera, 49, was the groundskeeper at Oakwood. He had worked there for 15 years and seen everything: tearful sons, bitter wives, grandchildren chasing each other between gravestones while their parents argued over inheritance. But something about Al had always stood out. The old man came like clockwork. He didn't stay long. He didn't cry. He just arrived, cleaned a grave with careful reverence, laid a rose, and sat for a while in silence. Miguel had asked around once. No one seemed to know whom the grave belonged to. It was just marked "Unknown Soldier." Miguel had assumed Al had lost a brother in the war. Maybe even more than one. He never intruded. But this morning, as he watched Al nearly fall, hands flailing for balance, rose crushed briefly in a tight grip, Miguel decided silence had gone on long enough. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed a snow shovel. The next Sunday, before sunrise, Miguel cleared the entire stretch of pathway from the main gate to Section 17. He did it in silence, before anyone could ask questions or offer praise. He salted it, swept it again for windblown powder, and made sure no ice remained. Then he went back to his toolshed and waited. When Al arrived, he paused at the top of the path. He looked down, confused. There was no snow. No ice. A perfect, narrow corridor cut through the cemetery, stopping exactly at the base of the unknown soldier's grave. Al stood there for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked. From a distance, Miguel watched the old man kneel without stumbling, place the white rose as always, and remain there, head bowed. He didn't look around. He didn't search for the person responsible. The following week, the path was cleared again. And again. And again. Miguel said nothing. He didn't need to. In spring, when snow gave way to slush and then to grass, Miguel began bringing his own tools: trowels, hedge shears, seed. He trimmed the area around the grave with extra care, raked the soil, and planted small clusters of white alyssum flowers around the border. They were hardy, simple, and always bloomed quietly. Miguel didn't ask for permission. He simply added beauty where neglect had been. One day in April, he saw Al standing by the grave longer than usual. This time, the old man didn't kneel right away. Instead, he walked a slow circle around the grave, studying the fresh blooms. Miguel stood nearby, pretending to inspect a tree trunk. "You do this?" Al asked without turning. Miguel paused. Then he nodded once. Al gave a small grunt. "Didn't ask you to." "I know. You don't even know who's buried there." "No, sir." Al turned. His eyes, pale and clouded with age, held something hard to name, gratitude, perhaps, or grief so deep it needed witnesses, not words. "Then why?" he asked. Miguel leaned on his rake. "You come here like it matters. Like someone mattered. That's enough for me." They said nothing after that. A week later, Miguel left a small stone at the corner of the grave, smooth, hand-painted, with a single word written in Vietnamese, "Ban, friend." Al saw it. He didn't touch it. But the next Sunday, he brought 2 white roses instead of 1. Others began to notice. There was Mrs. Tierney, who walked her dog past the cemetery every morning and paused more frequently now to watch the grave being tended. She began picking up stray wrappers on the path. There was the high school janitor, Hank, who drove by early on his way to work and sometimes stopped to clear the gate of fallen branches. No one spoke of it. They just acted. Something was spreading, not through speeches or announcements, but through quiet presence. Even the weather seemed to respect the ritual. Rain often held off just long enough for Al's visit. Wind hushed while he knelt. And still, Bao's name remained absent. Still, the government denied requests. Still, no obituary, no service number, no digital record. It was as if Bao had been a mirage. But Miguel knew better now. He saw what it did to a man like Al, to carry that kind of truth with no one to share it. One Sunday, as Al prepared to leave, he looked over his shoulder at Miguel. "You ever lose someone you couldn't name?" Miguel hesitated. "Yes." Al nodded. "Then you know." The 2 men stood there a moment longer, not speaking. Miguel's hands were still dirty from tending the soil. Al's coat was buttoned up to the neck, but a draft crept in anyway. Still, he looked stronger somehow. Later that summer, when wildflowers bloomed across the cemetery, Miguel arranged for a small iron bench to be installed near the grave. He paid for it himself. It faced east, where the morning light would hit first. He didn't ask for a plaque or dedication. But Al knew who placed it. The next Sunday, Al sat on the bench instead of kneeling. He was aging fast now. Kneeling was harder each week. But sitting didn't change the way he whispered Bao's name into the morning stillness. If anything, it gave him more time. And Miguel stood nearby, shovel in hand, rake resting on his shoulder, watching in quiet solidarity. The world hadn't noticed yet. There were no cameras, no headlines. Bao Nguyen's name was still absent from every national archive. But there, in a forgotten corner of Oakwood Cemetery, under blooming alyssum and morning sun, one man kept remembering. And another chose to help him do it. The shift began with a child. Lila Thompson was 12, all elbows and backpack straps, with curious eyes and a notebook covered in cat stickers. Her grandfather, Walter Thompson, a retired Army medic, had passed away 2 months earlier. Lila had adored him, their weekly milkshakes, his slow drawl telling her stories about helicopters and dust-offs in Da Nang. He never glamorized war. He just made sure she understood what courage looked like. That Sunday in September, Lila followed her mom to Oakwood Cemetery, where they brought fresh flowers to Walter's grave. On the way out, Lila tugged her mom's sleeve. "Who's that man?" she asked, pointing toward a figure sitting quietly on a bench in Section 17. It was Al Harding, his back straight despite the cane resting beside him, a white rose cradled gently in his hands. His lips moved soundlessly, eyes locked on the stone before him. Her mother shrugged. That's the old Marine. Been coming here for years. I think he knew someone buried over there. Nobody really knows. Lila nodded, but something held her in place. As her mom walked ahead, Lila approached slowly, stopping several feet from Al. "Hi," she said quietly. Al turned, eyebrows raised. He looked her over, ponytail, scuffed sneakers, notebook half hanging from her backpack. "Hello." She took another step. "Are you visiting someone?" Al considered the question. His instinct was to deflect, as always. But something in the girl's tone, genuine, curious, unhurried, melted his hesitation. "Yes," he said. "A friend." His name was Bao. Lila sat on the grass without asking. "What happened to him?" Al blinked, lips parting in surprise. Then slowly, patiently, he told her. The jungle. The interpreter. The dreams of a white coat. The firefight. The silence that followed. When he was done, Lila simply said, "That's not fair." "No," Al agreed. "It's not." She opened her notebook and began scribbling. Al peered over. "What are you doing?" "I'm writing his name. Bao Nguyen. You said it should be remembered." That evening, Lila told her mother what Al had shared. Her mom, taken aback, repeated the story to a neighbor, who happened to be a high school history teacher. Within days, the tale spread like slow fire across town. Not viral, not dramatic. Just shared, one cup of coffee at a time. The history teacher, Mr. Landry, reached out to Al directly. "I teach about Vietnam every spring," he said. "Nobody talks about the interpreters. The local allies. The people who bled for a country they didn't belong to on paper. I want to include Bao." Al hesitated. He wasn't used to being asked. He wasn't used to being believed. He handed over his notebook, the old one, with curled pages and faded ink. The sketches, the phrases in broken English, the coordinates. The letter he had written Bao's mother but never sent. Mr. Landry made copies and wove it into his curriculum. A week later, a dozen students showed up at the cemetery unannounced, each bearing a single white rose. Lila was among them. They said nothing, just placed the roses carefully in a semicircle around the grave. Al, caught mid-visit, was stunned. He tried to speak but found his throat thick. A soft voice spoke beside him. "He's not unknown anymore." From that moment, everything changed. Sasha Levin, who owned the town's florist shop, heard from Lila's mother and offered to donate a white rose every Sunday, forever. She placed a standing order, under the name B. Nguyen. Miguel Rivera, still tending the grave with quiet diligence, added a small laminated sign to the bench, unofficial and respectful. Reserved for those who remember. Letters arrived next. Veterans who had served in Vietnam wrote in after hearing whispers of the story. One, a former Green Beret named Curtis Hale, had worked with South Vietnamese interpreters in 1969. He remembered Bao. Not clearly, just the name, maybe a face. But it was enough. He mailed Al a photograph, a blurry group shot of 6 Vietnamese boys and their American advisors. Al stared at it for a long time. Bao was there, 17, slight, smiling with pride as he held a clipboard against his chest. "I thought I'd never see his face again," Al said softly. Curtis came to visit the grave that spring. He and Al stood side by side for hours, saying little. The mayor, Doreen Myers, heard about the rising interest and invited Al to a town council meeting. This time, the room fell quiet when he spoke. He never had a medal, Al told them. He never had a number. But he had a name. That should have been enough. Doreen cleared her throat. "It is now." Within 2 months, the town approved the renaming of Section 17's Memorial Corner. They reached out to the National Archives, the Department of Defense, even a university in California with records of Vietnamese wartime interpreters. A researcher there, Dr. Vivian Tran, found a partial transcript listing Nguyen Bao as an orphan enrolled in a Saigon youth program funded by U.S. aid. It wasn't much, but it gave the town grounds for action. They commissioned a new plaque. In memory of Bao Nguyen, interpreter, ally, brother. 1952 to 1969. And beneath that, he spoke for us. We now speak for him. The plaque was placed beside the original grave. The headstone itself remained unchanged. Federal laws forbade any edits without next of kin, but now, no one walked by that marker unaware. Children read the plaque on field trips. Veterans saluted it. Strangers left flowers. Bao, once unspoken, was finally being said aloud. Al remained steady in his rituals, but something in him lightened. His steps were slower, yes, but the burden on his shoulders eased. That Sunday, he brought 2 roses again. He laid one at the stone and held the other out to Lila, who had returned with her notebook in hand. You remember his name, he said. She took the rose, eyes shining. I always will. The morning of Memorial Day 2025 arrived under a sky so blue it felt reverent. Not a single cloud dared drift overhead, as if even the weather had been asked to observe silence. The air held that kind of stillness only early summer brings, warm but not yet heavy, stirred by a soft breeze that moved through the oaks of Oakwood Cemetery like a whispered hymn. At the far eastern edge of Section 17, the once-forgotten grave no longer stood alone. Over the past months, transformation had taken root, literally and figuratively. What had once been a patch of dry, overlooked ground was now a carefully curated sanctuary, alive with blooms and human presence. At its heart stood the Bao Nguyen and Albert Harding Memorial Garden. There was no fanfare in the name. It had been chosen deliberately by Al and approved without debate by the town council. Bao's name came first, not out of modesty on Al's part, but principle. He was younger, Al had said simply. He went first. The garden's centerpiece was a bronze statue, not grand in scale but monumental in its truth. It captured a moment from a single remembered night in 1969, Al, crouched in a bunker, handing a flashlight to Bao. The boy's hand reaches for it, eyes fixed not on the object but on Al's face, trusting, full of hope. The sculptor, a Korean War veteran turned artist named Clara Lin, had worked from memory, photographs, and Al's descriptions. It took her 6 months. She'd wept while finishing Bao's eyes. Around the base of the statue, white roses bloomed, real and perennial, grown from the very variety Al had laid each Sunday. Miguel Rivera had cultivated them himself, refusing to let any nursery interfere. It has to come from us, he'd said. There were benches now, simple ones, curved in gentle arcs facing the statue. On each bench was a small brass plate etched with one of Bao's phrases copied from Al's old notebook. One day, Dr. Nguyen. Belong is best word. I help because someone helped me. The garden was framed by creeping time, forget-me-nots, and the same alyssum that had first blossomed around that bare grave. Near the base of the memorial stood a polished black stone with a simple inscription. Dedicated to the Vietnamese allies who fought, translated, healed, and died alongside U.S. service members in Vietnam, unrecognized, unreturned, and unforgettable. And below it, unknown, is not the end of a story. The ceremony was modest but deeply attended. Veterans from across the state arrived, some in full uniform, others in jeans and old division caps. Students came in school buses, wearing little pins with Bao's name in cursive. Members of the Vietnamese American community traveled from nearby cities, some holding photographs of uncles or cousins lost to the war, others carrying incense and folded paper cranes. At the front stood Al, dressed in his Marine uniform, now carefully tailored to accommodate his aged frame. A slight tremor in his hand betrayed his nerves, but his spine was straight, his gaze unwavering. Beside him stood a woman no one expected. Nguyen, Bao's younger sister, now 72, had flown from California after being contacted by Dr. Tran from the university. The discovery had stunned her. For over 50 years, she believed Bao's body had been lost, his fate unknown. Her parents had died without ever knowing. When she was shown the statue, she cried for 3 hours. Now, she stood with Al, 2 lives braided by a war that took so much and a promise that gave something back. She placed a stick of incense into the earth beside the grave and whispered a short prayer in Vietnamese. Then, from her purse, she drew a tiny envelope, yellowed, sealed, and unopened. "I found this in a drawer," she said quietly to Al. "Bao never mailed it. It's addressed to someone named Albert." Al took it with shaking hands. He read his own name, scrawled in uneven English script. He pressed the envelope to his heart and closed his eyes. Later, when the crowd had dispersed and only a few lingered in respectful silence, Al opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. Bao had written, "Dear Albert, I tell my sister about you. I tell her not to worry. You protect me. When war finish, I want to find you. I think you are a good man. I think we be friends in peace too." Al folded the letter, tears sliding quietly down his face. "You were right, Bao," he whispered. "We are." Mai joined him on the bench. Neither spoke for a long time. Behind them, Lila Thompson placed her notebook on the statue base, its final page now filled with words she'd practiced carefully. "This is Bao's name. Bao Nguyen. He was real. He mattered. He made history, and now we are telling it." Mr. Landry, the history teacher, walked the students through the garden in small groups, letting them read the inscriptions, reflect by the flowers, and take notes. Every year going forward, this would be part of their curriculum, Vietnam not as a distant conflict, but as a tapestry of forgotten alliances and sacred debts. Sasha Levin, the florist, brought new white roses, 12 dozen in total, scattered gently by visitors at the base of the statue. She placed hers near the engraved quote, and whispered, "For every ally they left behind." At dusk, as the last of the light warmed the bronze faces of 2 boys long ago caught in war, Al remained on the bench beside Mai. His body weary, his breath slow, but his spirit settled. "I thought I'd be alone at the end," he said. Mai smiled softly. "You never were." Overhead, the flags flapped gently in the warm wind. And in the garden built from grief, truth, and the perseverance of one man's memory, a legacy rooted deeper than stone had begun to bloom. He remembered.